I'm Ryan Hanning from Whites Creek, Tennessee. Been formally involved with the SEEK project since really its inception. I'm a professor of theology, and much of the area that I study myself is sort of the ecological traditions and mores within the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I think perhaps that this is the most popular breakout session for our time together today. And no wonder with the pandemic, political vitriol, um, but amidst all this noise, there's a consensus that our relationship with creation is at best out of balance or at worst in direct conflict. So I think it's a very timely topic as we look at cultivating community resilience during these uncertain times. So let me introduce the topic a little bit, and then I'll introduce both our panelists, Leo Burke and Hannah Layton, who you're going to really enjoy. And I'll give you a little bit of lay of the land of our session together because it will be brief. So a little bit about my own background. I have been here in Whites Creek homesteading for the last 2 years, really felt compelled to get back into right relationship with the land. And so my family and I have been attempting to do that, and it's been a very restorative process. And my own interest, of course, is in studying religious traditions and how they provide models for being both in right relationship with God or the divine, right relationship with ourselves, a sense of integrity, and then with each other, that sort of moral order and common good, and with creation, issues of proper use, stewardship, and thanksgiving. And so these are the areas that I've been focused and writing on for the last several years, and now sort of living what I've spoke about here, trying to be in right relationship with the land where we raise sheep and goats and cows, among other things, on our homestead up here in Whites Creek. So a little bit about the topic and why we want to focus on this today. Faith communities and spiritual traditions really actively advance resilience, both contributing to climate action plans and cultivating mindfulness and centering practices and advocating for just adaptation and mitigation of the causes of the climate crisis we find ourselves in. And religious organizations and spiritual traditions really provide three sort of solutions. One, they provide a socially cohesive group. As Elisa mentioned, over 400,000 houses of worship. Nearly 1/2 of the US population identifies themselves as belonging to a particular faith tradition, and countless more who, while not members of a particular religious organization, associate themselves with some specific spiritual tradition. Secondly, religion provides within their own beliefs and mores, systems and traditions in which to address issues of proper stewardship and creation. And third, religious and spiritual traditions cultivate community resilience in multiple ways, both those practical ways in service to those in need, and those personal ways in giving you a context in which to deal with crisis. And so in light of that, we've invited two excellent panelists who will each speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So I'll introduce them both now, and then I'll turn it over to Hannah. So Hannah Layton has probably the coolest title over at Arizona State University. She works with the sustainability and she's the coordinator rather of sustainability and authenticity for the Center for Mindfulness, Compassion, and Resilience. And her own graduate work focused in preventing food waste and feeding the poor and vulnerable, and ways a community can be sources of resilience during these times of crisis. After she speaks, we'll hear from Leo Burke, who's the director of Climate Investing Initiative at Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. And Leo, I hope that we'll have time for you to share with us a story about the sort of the conspiracy of grace that led Vatican officials, most prominently Pope Francis, to meet with oil execs to actually look at some sustainable methods of moving towards a green economy. So with that, I will turn it over to Hannah to walk us through for the next 15 minutes her thoughts on cultivating community resilience during uncertain times. So Hannah, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Ryan. And hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Like Ryan said, my name is Hannah Layton, and I work with Arizona State University's Center for Mindfulness, Compassion, and Resilience. And yes, I am the Sustainability and Authenticity Coordinator. I'm stepping into that title right now. Our vision at Center is to create an academic culture of caring by advancing mindfulness and compassion practices at ASU and in the community to nurture purpose, focus, resilience, and connection. I've been working with the Center for about 3 years now, and it means a lot to me in my sustainability practice and just in life in general. So I'll start by just defining what I'm talking about when I say mindfulness. I might say it a lot, and so I want to define it before I get started. But mindfulness, in this sense, is just a focused awareness of the present moment. And I deeply honor the practice of mindfulness as it's deeply rooted in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. However, when I speak about it, or when we speak about it at Center, we're talking about it in more of a secular way. So it can be used as a framework to approach life with more awareness and agency. Okay, so mindfulness and sustainability. Um, we often discuss sustainability and we talk in terms of infrastructure and resources, such as the efficiency of energy technology or what we can harvest energy from. And these conversations are highly important and the work is vital. However, resilience and sustainability has a lot to do with social systems too, which I find especially interesting. Um, how can we build our capacity to be resilient at a personal or communal level? And what does this look like? That's kind of what I've explored with my mindfulness and sustainability connection. I think that the conversations and work around resilience building, as they continue to unfold, there's this emerging interest or maybe this readiness where people are wanting to think about resilience in a more holistic and inclusive way, not just scientifically, but also socially and spiritually. And this makes sense because the discipline of sustainability is inherently value-based, right? Why do we care about sustainability? It's because we care about life. We want to ensure that human and non-human life has an opportunity to persist now and in the future. We believe that life is meaningful, not just ours, but the idea of life. Um, and and not just life in general, but life that is healthy and opportunistic. And that's what drives us to want to regulate our impact on climate or on water usage and quality, on extracting materials for economy. Um, we care, or we do these things because we care, because we have this value. Um, and so that's kind of where the social pillar lies. So now that I've framed a little bit of why the social pillar of sustainability is important to me and to a lot of other people, um, I want to share a little bit of my personal journey of cultivating inner sustainability. I love that term. So originally, when I came to the university, I did my undergraduate and my graduate at ASU. And originally, when I came, I was a little bit angsty after high school. I didn't have a lot of patience for people. High school's hard. It's people are mean. And I really just wasn't into people after. Um, and so I wanted to focus and study stuff I believe in. And a lot of that was non-human systems. Um, and I was really interested in how to protect our natural ecosystems. I was interested in more of like the hard science of sustainability, like environmental field research and energy and technology and materials. Um, and when I started studying all of this, I was really interested and I was going to these lectures, but there was something missing. I wasn't feeling completely fulfilled with it. I was having a little bit of a hard time connecting, um, which was surprising because I was, this is where I felt home, was in this human systems and how to preserve this. But I would go to these lectures, and especially in the first couple of semesters, they were depressing. They were upsetting. I would hear things like, we've reached a critical threshold and we haven't made enough progress. So it's likely that this ecosystem is past the point of saving. Or we can make all the technologies we want to help regulate our systems, but unless human change, they would say, which probably isn't going to happen, uh, there's not really much we can do. And I was upset and I was feeling confused. I was like, well, this seems pointless. All my professors are telling me, we're kind of past the point of saving and humans are the problem. So that kind of triggered my more angst against humans again. um, but at this point, so this was I was about a year in, and at this point, um, when I was already feeling a little discouraged, um, there was a huge upset in my life where I lost my sister. And that point changed my life completely. There was a few months where I just had nothing. I had no motivation, no passion, um, no hope, and I wasn't sustainable. I was not sustaining myself whatsoever. Um, and I had already practiced mindfulness, like a few meditations or yoga practices in the past. Um, and it wasn't regular and it wasn't very formal. But in this time when I was really in the throes of my life, I remembered those practices. I needed those practices. Sometimes I would have trouble breathing, and so I would do my deep breathing techniques. Sometimes I couldn't fall asleep, so I would listen to guided meditations. Um, and um, yeah, I just started bringing these mindfulness practices in, and especially when I was upset. And then I decided, after a couple of months, I felt a little different. I couldn't quite name what the different was, but it felt a little easier. Like I had more control. Um, over something I didn't have any control over. So I started building a routine. I would practice mindfulness in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, just a couple of times throughout the, short times. In the morning, it would be about 15 minutes. In the afternoon, it would be 5. And then at night, I would fall asleep to my meditations. But I practiced not just when I really needed it, not just when I didn't have the breath or I didn't have, when I was going through the thick of it, but I started practicing it throughout my day, even when I didn't need it. And, uh, kind of what Ryan was talking about, it was a context to deal with crisis. It gave me that pathway to deal with crisis. And slowly, I started to regenerate. My mindfulness practice provided a pathway to rebuilding myself and to nourishing myself so that I could get through first a day and then some weeks, years into here I am today. Um, and it was within this process of learning self-sustainability that I became really interested in social sustainability. And I realized that people are suffering too. Um, a lot of us are suffering. We suffer as communities, we suffer individually. Um, and uh, the suffering of humans inherently leads to the suffering of environments. If we don't take time to nourish ourselves, then how can we take time to nourish what's outside of ourselves? And I realized that in order to have the capacity and real agency to make the transformations in the sustainability world that I wanted to, or that others want to, we have to be able to practice resilience at a personal level first. And that is self-sustainability. Um, I'll kind of more formally define self-sustainability for you all now. I believe self-sustainability includes nourishing ourselves with food and water and sleeping and doing what we can to feel safe and secure. We have the ability to expand our sense of self-sustainability by including well-being in our definition so that it becomes to sustain our well-being by practicing self-acceptance and self-management. It includes making a conscious effort to treat ourselves with respect, um, like eating healthy, connecting with our passions, nourishing positive relationships, healthy routines. And this effort can improve our lives and then improve the lives of others. And then our final definition is sustaining communities. So our ability, our capacity to sustain communities starts with our inner sense of sustainability, our capacity to sustain ourselves. Our relationships with others are a direct relationship, are a direct reflection of how we treat ourselves. We often project onto others how we treat and feel about ourselves. And so when we work to take care of ourselves, taking care of others or our surroundings, our environment becomes a lot easier. And when we talk about community well-being, we can use one of the most generally accepted definitions of sustainability, which is to ensure the well-being of our social, economic, and environmental qualities so that the future generations may continue to prosper. So that can only happen if we start with self and then community and then the environment. And I'll kind of wrap up there. I'll leave the rest for questions if you have it and maybe turn it over to Leo. But thank you for giving me the space to share.
Hannah, thank you very much. And yeah, please do either write your questions down in the chat function or save them for our question and answer time. But we'll turn it over to Leo now to walk us through a little bit of his reflection on building community resilience and his own experience in doing this through the Mendoza School of Business in Notre Dame. Go ahead, Leo.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Hannah. I hope the connection is clear enough. I'm actually on a small island in the South Pacific in Fiji, speaking to you today. So I wanted to just share about a story, really, about how we create a sustainable world and how we kind of move the dial to affect change. And one of the things that we had noticed in the business school is that there were a couple of different kinds of narratives that were surfacing. This was a few years ago. One was from investors who said that we needed to move quickly in terms of changing investments relative to climate change to meet the targets contained in the Paris Agreement. And at the same time, there were CEOs of oil companies who were saying fossil fuels are going to be around for a long, long time to come. And so these things were not matching up at all, but were really ships passing in the night. And we thought it's very important for both investors and oil companies to be on the same page. And so how to get them on the same page. So we had a heuristic, you might say, of if we could start with a set of principles and then create a dialogue, then we could achieve results. So these three words of principles, dialogue, and results sort of guided what we did. And we decided to attempt to hold a meeting at the to bring together the CEOs of the world's largest oil companies and the CEOs of the world's largest asset management firms, the largest investors in the world, and the heads of the world's largest pension funds, to come together and talk about what needed to shift with regard to how we're moving forward in the global energy transition. And that it would be very good if we could involve the Pope, frankly, because he would be with his encyclical Laudato Si, some of you might be familiar with, where he talks about the environment and the care for our common home. So one thing leading to another. First of all, people said such an endeavor would be impossible and that CEOs would not be interested in that. But talking to one person and then another and then another and then another, we were actually able to assemble at the Vatican in 2018 a meeting that involved CEOs of many large oil companies, brands that you would know and have filled your tank with, as well as the world's largest investors, asset management firms and pension funds, to get together to actually discuss the seemingly intractable issue of the energy transition. And to do so, we had to create a spirit of trust and vulnerability, and that actually happened. Our interlocutor at the Vatican is a fellow by the name of Cardinal Peter Turkson, who did an excellent job of helping moderate the two-day dialogue that we had. And Pope Francis joined us on the second day of that dialogue. It was successful in that people got together and were able to talk through issues without feeling judged or otherwise put on the spot in a way that wouldn't work. And then we were able to, as a result of that, everyone said, well, you know, it would be good to extend this further for the following year. So for 2019, the ante was upped, where we really wanted CEOs to sign statements in two areas. One was around the need for carbon pricing, where there was a lot of disagreement. And the second was the need for financial disclosures that were transparent relative to investments for sustainability. So it took, there were 100% of the people that came to the first year, 2018, came back to the second year, and then other CEOs asked if they could join as well. So we had some momentum going here. And in the 2019 meeting at the Vatican, the CEOs, about 30 CEOs, the world's largest oil companies and the biggest investors, signed these two statements. Now, we had done a lot of homework for months in negotiating all of this so that we could kind of work out a lot of issues. And but that happened. The 2020 meeting, which was supposed to have taken place in June, was postponed due to COVID. And so it's likely that might take place in one fashion or another in 2021. So what seems important is, in the midst of this process, is, as Hannah's talking about self-sustainability, is enabling all of these CEOs at the end of the day, besides running an oil company or running a large pension fund, they're all human beings. And they all have families, and they all have kids, and many of them have grandkids. And so they actually are deeply worried about what kind of world their grandkids are going to inherit, even if they run an oil company. And to enable their felt humanity, as well as a sense of the unitive nature of existence in which they're participating, enable them to really move, in some cases, past their corporate lawyers to really participate fully in this. And I don't know if you've seen in the news, but, and I can't say it's a direct result of the Vatican meeting, but there are signs that indicate so, where all of the European oil companies, the 5 largest European oil companies, have now come together to launch sustainability or renewable projects together for the first time. And I think, you know, the Pope's admonitions to them when we met last were so compelling that undoubtedly that's part of the motivation they've had. So it's very important for this process to continue in a way that has this open channel of dialogue where people can talk, where the press isn't involved and they're not feeling under the gun from their boards of directors or shareholders, and also to target specific results. So our attempt for 2020, which has been postponed, and we'll focus in 2021, are more specifics in terms of carbon pricing and how do carbon pricing systems actually allow for a just transition so that the poor and vulnerable are not disadvantaged. So I'll just pause right there, and if there's any dialogue or questions, we can get into it.
Great, thank you, Leo and Hannah. So we have about 20 minutes for questions, which is great. And I think you both already have brought up several important issues that are worthy of discussion. And Doug Bland, who gave our plenary session, started with a really great question. So I think I'll put that out there. If you do have a question, if we can just put it in the chat first, I'll call on you to ask the question, and we'll answer it. So, Doug, do you mind just restating the question for the group, unmuting yourself, and then we can have a discussion about it?
Yeah, thank you both. This was very good presentations and very provocative. So I addressed this at the time to Hannah, but would like you both maybe to respond. I love the word sustainability, but I'm beginning to see that it's not always adequate to the work we're doing. We want more than to sustain the status quo, which is not working for people and the planet. We want Earth to flourish, not just be sustained. I'm wondering if resilience may be a better, more holistic word. And several people commented on it and had good points too.
I can maybe start with an answer. Thank you so much for that question, Doug. I think that, yeah, the word sustainability is ambiguous. Everybody has a different definition of it, it seems. Even just going through my program at the university, each professor would have a different explanation for what sustainability is, which made it hard to pinpoint, what exactly am I working on? And I liked all of the comments. One in particular, I see sustainability as sustain the planet's ways, not ours, by Astrid. And I think that's the one I relate to most. And if I'm just using the word sustainability is not necessarily sustaining, our current path with the extractiveness that our extractive pathway, but to really sustain our ecosystems that sustain human life. I think that in terms of human, I think the sustainability conversation there's a lot of movement right now towards the word regeneration instead of sustain, so that we can regenerate the systems that we've depleted and extracted, and regenerate kind of includes this transform component, which is what we need to do. We don't need to just sustain, we need to transform and then practice sustaining our systems. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Yeah, Hannah, I would just add that was probably the best definition I've heard of sustainability. I think good job of taking a difficult question.
Thank you.
Another question's coming from Ben, and while Ben, you asked the question, I'll share my screen real quick of the picture of Pope Francis with the oil execs, if I can, in 2019. And I'm sure Leo is somewhere there in the background, maybe out of frame, but I'm not sure if I can do that, Jason, if I can share the picture or not. I probably can't. Oh, well, it's okay. But Ben, do you want to state your question? We can talk about it.
Yeah, I was so intrigued by and heartened by the Vatican initiative. It seems to run counter to the polarization that we're in right now, where we've demonized each other. And I think that bringing groups together and finding that unitive reality of we are human beings with families, and we do care about our kids and grandchildren. I think that was a brilliant way move. So I would just love to know more information, where to get more information about it, and also how others can participate.
Sure. There, yeah, I might combine the answer to your question with also a question that Gretchen raised about whether citizen organizations could also, how they participate as well. First of all, on the matter of just transition, the call for a just transition is actually in the preamble to the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015 by the nations of the world at the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, the big meeting in Paris called COP21. And so that just transition actually says that as we move from a heavily carbon-based economy to a carbon-free or reduced carbon economy, that we've got to take everyone into account and can't just have, you know, a certain kind of track of approach that's going to make poverty worse. And in fact, and looking at the 2021 meeting that we'll have, or the 2020 meeting that we had planned, we had several citizen organizations actually providing background information for that, including the Citizens Climate Lobby, which has done very important work in looking at carbon pricing mechanisms. So we have had a panel of experts that were looking at the pros and cons of different approaches. So I assume everyone in this call knows about carbon pricing, but just in case, the idea is to put a price on carbon. Where you put that price, whether it's at the wellhead or at the gas pump, makes some difference. So there are all kinds of technical things, but the idea is to basically price carbon out of existence, or to make it so expensive that it would make a lot of sense to choose lower cost renewable alternatives. So we do see the need to involve citizen groups. This particular, the meeting itself has so far just been CEOs, and whether, well, I won't say it's just been CEOs. We, at the last meeting, we had a couple of people from civil society and a couple of scientists. So we had Mary Robinson, who is chair of the Elders and the former president of Republic of Ireland, was in the meeting. We'll expand that as we can. It's really important to not get the meeting too big, so that the CEOs can continue to exchange views face to face in a relatively private setting, because so much is at stake. If you're a big oil company and your biggest investors are actually in the room, and you can create a context where they can tell you, if you keep investing as you are today in fossil fuels, we're going to withdraw our investments. We're going to divest from you because you're going to have too many stranded assets. Those are the kinds of conversations that just don't happen anyplace else, and are very, very important for people to have the impetus to change course. So we want to make sure that the future dialogues also have that kind, allow for that kind of tone. And of course, in a COVID world, you know, hopefully it's been so important to have face-to-face interaction. You know, we're learning how to do this on Zoom right now, but the face-to-face interactions that we've had have been very important. By the way, I'll also share that these meetings the last 2 years have been in a building on the Vatican grounds called Casina Pia Quattro, which is a 15th century villa. And it's the place where Galileo was tried for heresy. So the whole thing had some, you know, real history to it.
Thank you, Leah. And Astrid, you brought up a really good point. I think it's worthy of reflecting on too. Something that Pope Francis himself and other religious leaders have really honed in on, making sure that whatever new economy or decisions are made throughout this process don't continue to exploit the poor or much of the Southern Hemisphere where these resources come from. So Astrid, do you mind just sort of commenting a little bit more on what you posted and maybe just some of your own thoughts on how we might make sure the dialogue happens in a way that represents the interest of the most poor and vulnerable as well?
Sure. I basically mentioned everything that I worry about, because I work a lot with communities, and I'm very dedicated to equitable adaptation to climate change. And I think that one of the things that we always have to think about is what those communities have gone through historically and how they continue to go through the same things today. A lot of things have not changed, even though we are centuries ahead. So if we if we think about sustainability and if we think about empowering communities, I think we really need to see where they're coming from, what their history is, what the culture is, and work with that to bring that up and empower them with their own voice. That's how I see, their sustainability in the sense of making communities resilient. And resilient has a lot of interpretations also. But having them be powerful to really not only be hit and bounce back, but to be powerful to be hit and stay there instead of falling down and having to come back up. And there is a lot of culture, history, social science, and all that. And I'm not any of that, but I like to work on those things, and it's a big concern of mine.
Yeah, Hannah, do you want to respond a little bit? Because I know a lot of your research and the work that you did specifically in ensuring that the most vulnerable are cared for and making approaches to sustainability, making sure that they're represented. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, just first, Astrid, I thank you for making that observation. I think that is a critical observation that we need to talk about constantly until we come up with ways to mitigate, our impact on in our extractiveness of cultures and peoples and their resources. And I think that equity and ethics need to be at the forefront of every conversation around sustainability, because it's not a privilege to be able to survive. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to survive. But it has sorry, I'm at my grandparents' house. I hope they answer that in a minute. But essentially, I think that one of the reasons that it's so extractive is because we are in a globalized system. We have a global economy. We talk about globalization and access to everything all the time. And I think that, there are some good components of globalization. We can connect with other cultures. We can, there's a lot of economic benefits, but at the same time, that impacts these, most vulnerable populations the most. We put our waste in their communities. We take their valuable resources, and they don't get hardly anything. And so I think that the research I'm doing right now, or the work I'm trying to do, is, and I see my friend Nick Shipka on here, and I know he does similar stuff too, so maybe he wants to comment, but is really localizing economies and encouraging what you're talking about is the capacity building for resilience via localizing economies again. The global economy is really extractive, but if we can localize and to empower local economies, and we can have them keep what's there in their economy and be empowered and have some agency over how those resources are used or distributed or extracted, then we can really take care. Then they have the ability to take care and to set their boundaries. But if we continue to extract and just go in and take instead of give them some agency, then it's a lot harder. I see that Nick unmuted, so I'd love to hear your perspective, Nick, if you want to share.
Sorry, I know as soon as you had invited me to speak, I have to unfortunately leave, but
you have to leave.
I will just make, I'm so sorry. So awkward. But Hannah is spot on. And I think kind of going back to Doug's point about developing relationships, I think really sustainability at its core is bringing all of the relationships into balance. And that's our relationship with the earth, our relationships with each other, even the relationship you have with, the plants in your yard, or even, the whatever you're drinking in the morning. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that, if we frame sustainability in a way that we're kind of bringing things back into a balance, then we can kind of move forward and be able to be resilient and resistant to those shocks. Sorry again that I have to cut myself short. I have to go, but this was a great discussion, and Hannah, you did such a wonderful job.
Thank you. Hi, Nick. Good to see you.
Thanks, Nick. Good to see you.
You too.
So that leads to sort of follow-up question I have is, where are these conversations about stewardship happening? Vio, you said something really interesting, that to create a space in which people are both vulnerable and candid and can have an open dialogue. I think that's always been the responsibility very often of religious traditions. You think of civil rights and other things. Are those happening today, and where are they happening? Would be sort of one of the questions I have. And I'll let Hannah or Leo or anyone else answer that.
Hannah, why don't you start?
Okay, yeah, I think that these conversations, I mean, I try to surround myself with people who have these conversations, so I might be a little biased, because I really try to normalize and have, part of my work for my Center for Mindfulness is creating these spaces where we can have these dialogues and, you know, without judgment, with respect, and we can hold opposing opinions in a way that is respectful, um, and we try to frame it so that everybody has an open mind walking in. I think that it's really important to keep an open mind when you go into these conversations. I know that that's sometimes hard for me because I'm a very passionate person, and I am stubborn in a lot of my beliefs. But when we have these conversations, we have to be open-minded. I remember having a conversation with a director of an extraction company. He came into one of my sustainability classes, and I was like, how could you even talk about sustainability if you're doing, like, does it matter at that point? Like, are you truly trying to be sustainable if you're not trying to walk away from the company, or if the company is not trying to change into renewables? How do we balance that? And I think that just creating space to have these dialogues and understanding that the world is dependent on a certain system, and that transition is going to take a while. It's not, we can't just automatically switch to solar and energy and, hydro energy. Like, we are still a lot of our infrastructure is still very deeply reliant on, methane and coal. And so that just understanding that the transition isn't going to be immediate, even though we want it to be, as sustainability advocates or researchers or, professionals. And I think that's really important. And so when we can accept that, then we can start to have a lot more meaningful conversations, and start to create space for a variety of voices, and really encourage bringing these people who aren't obviously interested in sustainability, but do care. Like Leo is mentioning, these owners, these CEOs of oil companies, they care. They want to make a change. So it's just being open to being inclusive of these voices.
Thank you very much. And Leo, do you want to answer that as well? I mean, I'm sure getting all those people in the same room for a constructive dialogue probably took some work, and I'm curious about how you facilitated that.
Yeah, for 2 days actually together. So part of it is going around and talking to all of these CEOs prior to the meeting, of course, to be able to invite them into this space and let them know that fundamentally it's a safe space. And then to be able to develop personal relationships, as I've mentioned earlier, this matter of trust, and then to encourage them to, within their own organizations subsequently, to continue these kinds of dialogues in this spirit within their own organizations. And so faith communities can, you were starting to talk about earlier, Ryan, faith communities can play a very, very important role. And in fact, after the last Vatican meeting, there was a meeting of leaders of faith communities at the Nobel Institute in Oslo to actually discuss how to foster these kinds of dialogues. Because whether you're a citizen or a corporate leader, hopefully you participate in a faith community of one form or another. And so faith communities can lead the charge. The other thing, just mention that, we're seeing more, due to Greta and her colleagues and friends, more and more young people than ever before engaging in very intelligent, very thoughtful considerations relative to this. So the more people we have talking about this, the more important it'll be to be able to move forward constructively, which is critical.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Jason, Jason's one of the graduate students who has his finger on the pulse of a lot of this in terms of how religious communities create some of these spaces, how they themselves engage in this dialogue. So Jason, I'm just curious if you have any comments and thoughts. Sorry to put you on the spot, but you always have a lot to share.
About how the religious communities share in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, and how they create some of these opportunities for dialogue and their own response, to being good members of the community as well.
Well, it is interesting. One of the things we talked about in the Seek project is how much that response varies, and it can be something that I found is interesting is how there's this kind of dual pathway that there can be a response from an institutional perspective within a congregation, and there can also be a response within the congregants themselves. So the institutional perspective would be something like doing energy efficiency, getting solar, or purchasing clean energy from your utility if it's available, or whatever resource, those kinds of things. And then the individuals, or the more granular kind of congregants reactions could be the things that we do in our own homes. And so those could be similar in that if you have, if you own a home, then you can do those energy efficiency actions yourself. You can organize within your community. You can become active at a larger scale if you want, and advocate for policies, not just at the ballot box, but by helping other people understand these issues and the importance of the issues. So as faith communities come together in different ways, the Care for Creation groups, for instance, they think a lot about these types of issues and how to mobilize their congregants and the larger communities. So I find that kind of interesting, how there's different ways to look at this from a kind of structural point of view, and then like an agency point of view of what people can do themselves.
Yeah, I think everyone's nodding their heads. I think we all agree that that's the solution, right? Is that this personal accountability, as well as in holding the communities that we are, either have a relationship with, and or any type of influence over, to make the same decisions for themselves and for the benefit of everyone. So our time is wrapping up. So I just want to again thank Leo and Hannah for really thoughtful conversation starters and just their own reflections to help us think through how communities can be more resilient, and how the faith traditions and spiritual traditions contribute to that. So in just a minute, we'll be put back into the main room with everyone, and we'll have the rest of the program. And the only question I have last is Doug, when does Eco Confessional open? I'm just curious. I'd be happy to do it via Zoom.
You just want to shower with your partner, don't you?
Right. I'm curious, you mentioned one story. I'm sure there are other stories about people interacting with you in regard to that. Are people typically pretty open and interested in sort of making a penance?
They have been. It's been a very good conversation starter, and sort of a bridge builder between religious tradition and people who may have had bad experience in their faith community, but yet, I mean, it's partly just the different reactions I get from wearing a clerical collar. Some people very positive, some people very negative. But if you play the fool, that helps.
Great, thanks so much. And we have about another minute left. So I want to remind everyone before you leave, if you could please complete the post-workshop survey. It helps us plan for future events and future workshops like this. And we really hope you got something out of it. And Leo, we might have some friends in common, but I remember I received an advance copy of Laudato Si as a professional theologian. And the way the Vatican works is I get it 24 hours before it's officially released. And to get access to that, I actually have to agree that I won't read any leaked copies. And of course, there was a leaked copy that was a draft. So I had 24 hours to pour through this thing before giving some public commentary on various news outlets. But Cardinal Turkson is really thoughtful on this issue, specifically how to integrate the business community with
Yeah.
this. And so I've been really
Yeah.
impressed about his own reflection on how to align even a business's desire for their shareholders or for their workers to be able to profit and make equitable wages, not mutually exclusive to good stewardship. In fact, good stewardship actually advances their cause in terms of longevity and their own sustainability in terms of business practices. So I'm sure you've reflected a lot on that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Cardinal Turkson really exemplifies the spirit of inclusiveness at every level, and he's a great listener.
Yeah, very good man. So I think, are we all back yet, Cindy? I know she's moving some people around.
It's automatic, so it
Oh.
looks like
Yeah.
the breakout room is closed.
Okay.
Hello,
great.
everyone. I was on mute. Hello. Good to be back with everybody. Let me see. Well, here y'all look pretty happy. We had a good session also. In fact, there was some cross-fertilization going on that not everybody realized. I was wishing that we could reach out and grab Leo for something that somebody brought up. I'm going to put myself back on gallery view. So here we are in the closing plenary, and this is going to be pretty quick. We're not going to be doing any reporting out or any things like that. There are a couple things I want to bring your attention to. One is, who's on slides right now? Is it Jason or Jairo?
That's me.
Okay, great. Could you do me a favor and bring up the website, the program page of the website?
Sure.
You can just grab that. Now these are related. This is the QR code version. It depends which technology you like for doing your stuff. But there are three things that we want to draw your attention to at this time. One is, we know that we were throwing a lot at everybody in a short amount of time in this workshop. We were covering a number of different topics that we understand relate to each other, but not everybody else might, right? So, and we wanted to pique your interest, give you an introduction, give you kind of a roadmap for getting deeper into some of these issues if you would like to. And one way of doing that is, okay, so Cindy put in the chat the URL for the workshop program. In the workshop program, there were hyperlinks. Under every session, there are about 3 options that we gave there for people that wanted to follow up more on stewardship or on climate interventions or solar or resilience, some opportunities that you can have for doing things that are more or less engaged depending on how you feel. On the simplest level, signing up for certain kinds of mailing lists to get more information about those topics. And then if you want to be more active, you can sign up for a treasure hunt with Jerry if you want to do more energy stewardship or for a climate interactive scenario session that we would host or some other things. So we really encourage you to go into those hyperlinks or use the QR codes to sign up for those things. And then we'll be getting back in touch with people to schedule them or to follow up as the case may be. The other thing that we would like you to do is, let me just kind of see what people are posting down here. There, somewhere in the chat, there is a workshop evaluation survey. It's really short. It's a Google form. If somebody could post that back in the chat. I know it was up further, but to put it back there so people can grab it now. Thank you, Catherine. If you could fill that out, that would be super helpful for us because it gives us an indication of how well these sessions came across to you and what you got out of them. We're also really interested in what else you would like to know in the future, what you would like us to do, what kinds of things we can plan. And as long as we're in this COVID virtual world, we're going to be thinking pretty hard about doing things on a more regular basis in a Zoom environment and other kinds of things that can help people stay connected, help people continue to make progress on these passions and goals they have, even when it feels like it's hard to do because it's hard to move around in the world. Unless you're Leo in Fiji and you're in a COVID-free environment and you can go anywhere you want. Maybe we'll all go to Fiji, but they won't let us in, I think, is the problem.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to just mention to everyone is Hannah has graciously offered to lead a mindfulness session at the close of this workshop for anybody who would like to stay around for that. And Cindy will turn over hosting to me, and we'll be able to keep this same Zoom room open for as long as we need to, probably about a half an hour. Is that about right, Hannah?
Meditation. I'm just going to lead a meditation, and it'll be about 15 minutes. So if
About
you have
15
an extra
minutes.
15 minutes, you're welcome to stay.
Okay. And I just want to thank everybody for being with us at this workshop, for engaging as fluidly and fluently as everybody has been able to do. It's kind of remarkable. There were really not any serious technical glitches at all. So thank you, Cindy and Melissa, for that. And all the students, Cairo and Catherine and Leah and Jason, who worked really hard to help prepare for this workshop and to keep it moving and going and on track during the last 3 hours. And I just want to leave the last few minutes open for anybody to say anything that they would like to say. Any other questions or comments? Now would be the time. You can do it in the chat or out loud.
Well, thanks, Elijah, for your leadership and being able to enable this to happen. And it's really thoughtful and I think very effective. So thank you.
Thank you, Leo, but it really has been a team effort in a big way.
I'm sure.
Yeah.